Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to be looking at the iconic Line 6 DM4 Distortion Modeler. So the Line 6 4 series is a historically very popular series of pedals by Line 6. This is where you started to see everyone with the same pedals on the board. You would find the same pedals on all the most popular pedal boards and rig rundowns of the day. The 4 series by Line 6 was definitely in the early stages of that. The DL4 is still, I think, my favorite delay pedal of all time, but because of its clunkiness and its just slight age of technology, it's not very practical to have on a board right now. But I do hope to have a board that includes maybe both of these 4 series pedals on it. But there were several pedals in this series. The DL4, which was the delay modeler pedal. You had the MM4, which is the modulation modeler, the FM4, the AM4, the DM4, and then you had a looper in the same enclosure, same size enclosure. And all of these pedals had several models and emulations of a certain type of effect, and this all comes from the pod technology of the day. And this was like its iteration from going into the pod and to pulling just the effects out and being able to just use the effects into a more traditional pedal board and amp setup. The DM4 is iconic and particularly known by the user of the Edge. This is where he gets his overdrive sounds mainly. He has the rack version of this and still uses it today. That was a big deal when his rig rundown came out and everyone saw that he was still using this classic effect, and then people started buying them again. And so I hope to kind of cover each of these 4 series pedals eventually, but today we're going to stick to this distortion modeler. And we're going to go through a little bit of all the capabilities of this pedal, but we're going to listen to some specific models here today. So let's look at specifically the DM4 and what controls we have at our fingertips, and then we'll start listening to each sound. So on the top panel here, we have our model selector, which is where you're going to go between what model, what distortion emulation you're going to be going for. You have your drive knob, bass, middle, and treble knobs, and those have some other controls depending on what model, what preset you're on. And then you have volume, which again also can turn on and off the gate. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to have the gate off. And that's kind of optional. Based on the 4 foot switches here, you can hold and save to have up to 4 saved presets. On the back panel, you can also use an expression, which gives you different options depending on what model you're on. Alright, so before we get into each preset, let's go over my clean sound. I'm using my PRS. We're going straight into the DM4, into my Smart Bell Dumble ODS style head, into the Little John Cabs prototype number 1, loaded with EVM 12L speakers. Here's my clean tone on the neck pickup. So it's pretty flat, very clean, so that's going to be just our basis for each of these models here. So let's start with the boost comp mode. This is based on an MXR microamp, which is really one knob. So it had a lot of character in it, and so we're going to dial it up here. Everything is set at noon, and I'm reading the manual here, and if you set the bass and treble to 12 o'clock, That's going to be the most standard sound for the micro amp, and the mid knob is going to adjust the amount of compression. So let's zero everything out here. We're going to turn the compression all the way down. And here's our clean tone. Very compressed. Doesn't sound a whole lot like the micro amp in my opinion. Let's turn the drive up a little bit. So here's the clean tone again. You can hear it's hitting the front end of the amp quite a bit here. And then we can also play with that compression with the mid knob. Quite a bit of compression on tap there. Definitely kind of diverges from the micro amp at that point, but it's a cool sound. It's a pretty rich sound nonetheless. All right, next we have the tube drive, which is based on the Chandler tube driver, very iconic Eric Johnson style sound. And we're going to take everything back to noon. The original one only had a bass and a treble, and so we've added the ability to add some mids or cut mids with here. So I don't know if this totally gets that tube driver sound that when you think of the Eric Johnson style, but every time I've played a tube driver, it's not exactly what I expect, and this is actually a little closer from what I remember the last tube driver that I played. This is a little bit closer to the experience that I actually had, where the EQ is doing maybe minimal at best, but it's a lot of saturated mid-range distortion there. All right, so let's move on to the Screamer. The Screamer is based on a TS-808. This is every other Overdrive. However, I'm a big fan of tube Screamers. If we go here, It's got that tube screamery vibe. Again, I mean, this is not the most TS-808 sounding pedal that I've ever heard, but it's definitely, they actually made it a little cleaner, I think, than a typical tube screamer to kind of push people towards the classic tube screamer sound. But it does have that, 720 hertz mid hump, kind of either way. I had the mids kind of flat, but it was still present there. All right, let's move on to the Overdrive, which is based on the DoD Overdrive preamp 250. This is the classic 2-knob Overdrive, keeping things back at noon here. And so we've got basically a 3-band EQ that we're adding to a DoD 250. This is that Ingve sound. It's a really classic, pretty crispy overdrive. It's very crunchy. Yeah, it's really crispy. I'm usually not a fan of a DoD 250. It's pretty gnarly. It's a very boxy sound, but it's a very 80s thing to be able to cut through the mix, and this does that job for sure. So let's move on to the next one, the classic distortion, which is based on a Rat. We all love a Proco Rat, and having a 3-knob EQ is really nice. So on here on the manual, it says the mid knob functions like the original Rat's filter control, and then we can have bass and treble, cut or boost. This does the Rat thing for sure. Having the bass and treble to kind of add some low end there, or we can make it cut even a little bit more. Pretty bright, gnarly sound, but sometimes that's really helpful in the mix, and that's the way I use a Rat sometimes, if not for that just really nice, thick, woolly distortion sound. All right, if we go to the next one, it's everyone's favorite, the heavy distortion, which is based on the Metal Zone, the Boss MT 2. Remember having my metal zone and practicing my dime bag squeals. Yeah, I mean, this gives you that metal zone sound for sure. All the dime bag stuff, I have not tried to even play that in years, so I'm surprised it came out that well. Let's move on to the Colordrive. So now we're getting into the classic fuzz sounds here. The Colordrive is based on the Color Sound Overdriver, and this is like one of the earliest fuzz pedals. And the mid knob allows you to boost or cut the mid range and tailor the tone to your guitar. And then the mid at noon has no effect. So it's just boosting and cutting like adding a mid knob would. So it's a really light, pretty subtle thing, even maxed out. It doesn't get into the full-blown fuzz sound. So it's got just a really classic overdrive, pretty subtle, pretty boxy, but it's very crunchy sound. The next one we've got the buzzsaw, which is the Maestro Fuzz Tone. Again, it's not as much drive, is these pedals maybe classically had, but you also got to think about the tones associated with a lot of these older pedals is going into amps that are already being pushed, and so it's just kind of imploding on itself. But either way, these are pretty bright and a little cleaner than I would think about some of these classic fuzz pedals. The next one are facial fuzz, not one hard to figure out. Is a fuzz face. So Dallas Arbor fuzz face. We're going to set everything to noon here. It's even got a lot of the cleanup that you expect with a fuzz face. Man, a fuzz face is just so easy to play. There's so many variants and versions of them. This is by no means a classic true representation in an analog way of a fuzz face, but for the technology at the time, this is a great emulation of a fuzz face. It puts me in that same place. It's very silky, very smooth. The next one, we've got the Jumbo Fuzz, which is based on a Vox tone bender. It's got a great tone bender sound. I really like the ability to cut treble, boost mids, and bass. The tone bender sound is so shrill to me, and under my fingers it's hard to play, and this kind of gives me a little more ability, honestly, to just make it sound and feel a little bit more like a fuzz face, and then I can play a tone bender sound. But that's a personal preference thing. This definitely is similar to a lot of the tone benders I've tried to play and try to love. All right, we only got two more. We have the Fuzz Pi, which is the Electro-Harmonix Big Muff, and this is emulating a Big Muff Pi. The mid knob functions like the normal tone control on a Big Muff, and then we have bass and treble to add to that. Big muff again, it's just such an overwhelming effect. This definitely puts you in big muff territory. Alright, so then we have the Jet Fuzz, which is based on the Roland Jet Phaser. A little more of an uncommon fuzz pedal. And so if we look at the small labeling on the bass and treble knobs, the bass controls the feedback. Treble can set the rate of the phaser, and then the mid knob is the tone control over the whole effect. And just as a caveat, this is the only effect that the noise gate function will not work with, but you can add a noise gate to any of the other distortion effects here. So it's a pretty in your face, it's hard to get rid of that phaser sound. With the feedback, it's goes from not very subtle to completely not subtle. But it's a really unique kind of fun pedal that they threw in here. It's really an oddball one. So these last few pedals here are distortions that are based on line 6 things, except for one. We do have an Octave Fuzz based on Octavia. So the next one, we've got the line 6 drive, and so they say the mid knob is like a time control going through eras of distortions. And so let's just listen to Everything at Noon, and then we'll mess with the mid knob because it sounds like that has more of effect than anything else. So you can hear backing the mid down adds more of a scoop sound, and it's a really big on the low end. And as you turn the mid knob up, it gets a lot more narrow rather than a typical middle control. All All right, so the next one is the Line 6 Distortion, which they say is completely over the top. They also have icons for each of these pedals here, and the icon for this is a what looks like a screaming monkey with a human mouth. I'm not even really sure how else to describe it. I'll put it on the screen here. So I imagine this is something like the Line 6 Insane channel from the Spider amps. It's kind of a hilarious thing to turn down on the Insane, what do they call it? Completely over the top distortion. Yeah, it's like you expect, overly distorted. The next one is the Sub-Octave Fuzz, and this one's inspired by the, I've actually never heard of this pedal, the Octave Divider. And so the mid knob allows you to blend in the amount of lower octave, and then we've got bass and treble for tone. So you've got kind of a classic, almost lower gain, rat sounding fuzz distortion, and then you've got the low octave to blend in there. And then very lastly, we have our Octave Fuzz, which is based on the Octavia. And so I believe this one we've just got our 3-band EQ to throw on top of an Octavia sound. Yep, it's an Octavia, really nasty fuzz with that higher octave, and you don't really have control over that higher octave. That would have been a nice feature, but man, overall I'm really impressed with a lot of the sounds here, namely some of the lower gain overdrive sounds. I thought the tube driver sound was really usable. Of course, the tube screamer, the rat sound, and the fuzz face. Man, you could really get into some Jeff Beckish territory with this, just where these gliding notes, especially with that fuzz face and even the big muff sound, but where you can add a lot of mids and forwardness to each note they really sing. And again, for the time, this was pretty groundbreaking technology to have on your pedal board all these different drive pedals, and you can have, you know, 4 iconic drive sounds stored in 4 presets all in one pedal. Give you a lot of versatility, and there's some oddball pedals that they threw in here as well. So this is a great classic effect. You can find them really cheap, and it's just a fun one to have in your collection. Again, they're not really practical on a board nowadays. They take up so much space. They have kind of unique power requirements. That's, you know, that was the classic struggle with your Voodoo Lab pedal power, is being able to power a Line 6 DL4 or one of the 4 series pedals. But nonetheless, this is a great one to have in your collection, and just to mess around with really early technology on digital overdrive and distortions, and just to have in the collection. And so we'll be exploring some of the other 4 series Line 6 pedals. I know this was a little bit of a longer video, but let me know what other classic, iconic distortion, early technology, modulation, and modeler pedals you would like to see demoed on this channel. I know a lot of us have these kind of off-the-wall modeler pedals that were on our early iterations of pedal boards just because of what we could afford at the time. And so I really like the trip down nostalgia lane here. And so let me know what pedals you had on your early iterations of pedal boards that were kind of modeling pedals, and specifically digital distortion style pedals, because there was a lot that followed up from this DM4 release. If this is the kind of content that you enjoy, please ask that you like and subscribe to the channel. Share this channel with others. We're still a young, growing community here, and I appreciate everyone who's been chipping in and talking in the comments here. We've got a good community going, and so share this community with others. Until next time, I've been Colin. All right, so let's move on to the Overdrive, which is based on the DD. Hey. Okay. On the market as far as pedal. All right, so let's move on to the Overdrive, which is based. So on the top, Overdrive, which is based on the DD. So the Line 6 4. So let's move on to the Overdrive, which is based.